just want to say to the people who are viewing this, I chose to have Taki 183 as my first interview. And then I wanted, and that's for the New York Writers Project. So, Al, as you have told me, Al, you watched the Cool Earl interview that was on the Philadelphia War Writers Project, correct?
I did.
And I believe when we spoke, you said, wow, got a lot out of it, and we need to keep this history coming. Am I correct?
Absolutely.
So, what I would like to say is for everybody watching, a lot of the time when folks get wrapped up with someone who has passed away, or sometimes people just stay attached to one thing. And I need everybody to understand that Al Diaz as Bomb One was very popular in the New York City writers movement long before he met Jean. And Bomb One had fame. And what that means is he was well known, his name was up, he got around. And this is some of the history sometimes that I think people don't get a chance to understand because of his ties with SAMO. Do you ever feel that possibly, Al, that your writer's history might get a little bit overshadowed by SAMO?
Oh, yeah, sure, all the time. I mean,
Right.
you were present for Stapp's event over at
No,
that.
I wasn't there. No, I was. I saw you guys at Tracy 168's memorial. I,
Oh, okay. Well, Staff did a little thing. He was like talking to write a comment. There's a bunch of us there.
yes, yes, I
And
saw that.
when I told him that because he thought I was my only thing was, and this is a graffiti guy.
Yes, yes.
I mean, of course, older graffiti guy. I mean, he's an older graffiti guy, but some of the ones that I personally have known for a long time, they all know that. But he was like, "Oh, really? I didn't know you." I was like, "Yeah,
Right, right. So at
yeah."
times, yes, these things get overshadowed. Now,
Because of the fact that it's a Basquiat related thing. So,
exactly.
and that he's more famous than God. So that's really what people will just focus on.
And you know what? I mentioned to you that day. You see, I had met T Kid 170 before. I spoke to T Kid that day. I felt that he was going to remember me. He doesn't remember me as a friend. That's not what I'm saying. It's just we've met a few times. T Kid that day was sharing a black book with Chain 3. They were putting pieces in each other's books, which is something we always see everywhere in any writer's community. But T Kid did take the moment to speak with me. And actually, I want to thank that brother because, well, let's just put it this way. If T Kid don't want to talk to you, he's not going to talk to you, right?
No, he's
And
not. He's
and yeah, and he took the time to actually tell me, hey, calm down and don't let this guy, talking about cornbread, don't let this guy get you down, man. So I want to shout out T Kid 170 for that. He took the moment to let me know, but then I explained to folks, well, a history has to go into the museum, right? And the hip hop museum wants to get it right. Did you want to say something, Al?
No, it's true about like like a museum, a history. You have to do it from academically.
Thank you.
You have to have it correct. I mean, because the last thing you want to do is I mean, people go to museums as an educational experience.
Exactly.
So if you're learning something, you want to learn the facts, not some bullshit that got misconstrued and became like we mentioned earlier, where nonsense or bullshit or whatever you want to call it becomes fact,
Yes.
and then it perpetuates and that's I mean you have to really consider the fact that that's reality, that a lot of the information we've gotten from I mean from the past is just never happened or it didn't happen according to the stories that we receive because we're not we're like imagine how different things really went down 2,000 years ago
Yes.
because there's no first-hand storyteller. So if it relies on information that's been like watered down for like 2,000 years, imagine, come on, really? It's only, yeah, and you know how human beings are famous for playing telephone with any information, you know.
Oh yeah,
By the
and
time, by the time it gets to the third person, it's a completely different story. So,
sure. And you know
so
what's
that's it's really, and I'm a stickler about that. I'm like, if you don't know, don't say anything. You
Thank
know,
you.
yeah.
Yes, and if you're not going to the source, so this is what I would like to say. I did see you that day. I might have said hello to you, but I'm even guilty of the whole thing. Wow. It's the guys that created SAMO and he was partners with BASQUIAT. And that day, I didn't bother you with that. So it would be months later, over a year later now, that you actually received the Herbert Cole Names, Graffiti, and Culture PDF, which I sent to you. And I think, like most folks, it blows their mind. You know what I mean?
It is. I mean, it's pretty impressive. Yeah, it's a lot. He's really thorough. His writing is thorough.
Yes.
The way the way he explores like the importance of name and the function of a name and how a nickname. Just it's just
Yeah,
really,
he's
really
and
great.
he's a very eloquent writer as well. As I mentioned, he's possibly has already turned 87, but I've gotten him in contact with the museum, the hip hop museum, and he gave them the okay to go ahead and use that study. So isn't that great, Al? Because
It is. It's really. I mean, sometimes things like of that nature have they're just ahead of it was ahead of its time, and it still is equally relevant, but even more so perhaps because there's more people interested in that topic
yes,
now.
yes,
I could see why it was buried at that time because it was, it was
and
the nature of the topic of names
yes, yes,
and graffiti had not been was not now it's a global phenomenon, so people have
right.
taken it has that much more gravity to it, you know.
So when he actually meets Johnny Rodriguez, who wrote Johnny of 83,
Oh
or or,
yeah,
or it might
but
have been
but
Johnny of
Bolita.
93. It might have been Johnny of 93, but he also wrote another extended form of his name, which was Bolita
Right.
as Johnny Cool. And that's the Manhattan movie credit style that I'm going to eventually explore and explain to folks. But when you track that style of tag, that actually ends up in Brooklyn with Miko as Latin Pride, right? And it also ends up in the Bronx. Cool Herc's first tag is Clyde as Cool. How amazing is it that that's not even signatures and street numbers? That's the second heritage tag
I
that comes out.
remember the as thing. I remember
There
like
you go.
Luca as Dimples and Pepsi as Flocka and all that shit. That was
So,
that when I was a little kid.
and
That
that's
was
what I
the
wanted to
thing.
tell
And
you.
it's like a role in a film. Um,
Yes.
Spencer Tracy as that kind of thing.
That's why it's called the Manhattan movie credit. You feel me?
Right. Oh, that's
So,
what he.
so
I didn't even the Manhattan movie.
that's what I have named it because this is my research and I
But
have the
I remember, I totally remember that. I remember the TLFE, True Love Forever, and
yes,
I probably wrote that. I remember like writing me and my girlfriend at that time when I was 11 or something,
sure.
you know, our name in a heart, and then the TLFE.
So now, Al, since you're from the Lower East Side, this is very important and why I bring up the Manhattan movie credit. So I know that you're saying when you started writing Bomb One that most of that signatures and street number style was coming from Washington Heights. But when you say you remember the Manhattan movie credit, do you remember that younger on the Lower East Side?
When I was like before the graffiti thing.
So, so, so
That was
can I?
like it was yeah, like when you become aware of like people because it's like people. I grew up in a housing project, Jacob Reese houses.
Yes,
So like people writing on the elevator, and
yes,
the people because you know everybody. it's like, oh, Chela as whatever,
So
whatever,
this is
and then like, so you become aware of it because it's like he just Cole described. You're aware of it, and then you know the people. So you're like, I mean, you may not be close to they usually people that were a bit older than you. I mean, at that age when I was
yes,
noticing that. Um, so they were like the big kids.
yes. And can I let me say this about that. So the very first signatures and street numbers that we have documented with photographic proof is coming out of Italian Harlem. And then it moves to El Barrio, Spanish Harlem. The Puerto Rican kids pick it up and they love it. And they take that first change where they put the of in that Herbert Cole reports on, Jose of 109, Papo of 87, ST for street. And they also will actually form that together with the Manhattan movie credit. In other words, you'll see Chino as crazy of 110.
So the Italian, the Palladino Avenue or whatever, were
Right.
they just putting a number? Is
Oh
that
yeah, the Leo 115 ST, David 115 ST, and
so? It was
Ray,
what a street. Oh,
yes,
okay.
and Ray 109. Ray is actually he streamlined it, but the other two kids
Put
put
the
the
as the
ST.
street,
Yeah,
right?
so that's how we really know what they're referencing. And now when it makes it over to El Barrio, Spanish Harlem,
They put of.
right. So in 1969, we have a photo in the Lower East Side Park, and girls participated in this. It's very important that
It
this,
is totally like
yes,
the as thing. Yeah,
yes,
that's what I was saying. Like girls in the, like the older kids. They're not just the boys, but
right.
they're writing this as that.
Yes. So that Manhattan movie credit, which first appears in El Barrio in Spanish Harlem, it somehow makes that move down to the Lower East Side because in Robert Reisner's book, 2000 Years of Wall Writing, there's 5 tags on the bench. Patty as Pepsi. That was also popular. Sodas as
But
nicknames.
Pepsi was a kind of that was like a. It's funny because
And 7 Up, too.
but Pepsi was like a girl's nickname.
Yes.
Maybe it became popular maybe late '60s, early
Yes.
'70s.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, Basquiat did a painting, the famous painting that I sold, and it said Pepsi and Flacco. So he was aware of those types of
And once again, this is New York City history. It's our history that predates anything that's going on in Philadelphia. Because when Herbert Cole first meets Johnny, I was going to mention it. It's in 1966. These guys haven't even really, you know, they haven't gotten going yet. And Johnny is saying we've been doing this for years already.
right,
So
right.
again, gangs did limit how far it was able to go, and also it was trendy. But it was trendy from 1960 to 1964. By 1965, we already have Popo of 87th Street, very popular, and we have Foxy of 100th Street, who a gentleman by the name of Don Hogan Charles told me Foxy was a Puerto Rican guy who came out of Washington Projects in El Barrio on 100th Street, and he did every single corner from the East River all the way to the Hudson River. On every corner on 100th Street, you saw Foxy of 100 ST. So here are the guys who are beginning to go out of the neighborhood for the very
The
first
tag,
time.
they're actually like bombing. Yeah,
Exactly. And that's 1965.
there
So
you
they're
go.
coming up off the block. It's not a trend anymore. And they're actually beginning to put the early method of bombing into. But again, we got to remember these gangs. You took chances going into the wrong neighborhood, you know? And that even goes right in Italian Harlem. The Italian kids did not let the Puerto Rican kids into their neighborhood. You did not come east of Lexington. You know what I mean? So at these particular times, too, this is interesting, Al. When we look at the names on the walls, Leonardo was the most popular name for Italian boys in the 1900s. Raymundo, we see Ray 109. Then when the names go across Lexington, we're now seeing Papo. We're
Right.
seeing Jose.
Jose.
All you have to do is follow the names. The research is not that hard. I'm fairly bright. Okay. I come from a home with an educator. My mother, taught in colleges and whatnot. But like you, I was a delinquent. I was not interested in paying attention in school. I went to Jamaica Get High. Look at what we called the school. It's got to
Yeah, yeah.
it's got to tell you something. Jamaica High School. No, what are you talking about? Jamaica Get High? And we spent, we had a park across the street, and we were smoking blunts and drinking Old Gold and Ballantine. I wasn't in school. Before hip hop, that united children of different colors, Al. You know what I'm talking about. And that's
I
the
totally
first
did.
one. And I
Yeah.
don't want that history lost. Can you just speak on that for a moment? Do you first
Well,
off, do you
yeah, I
agree
mean,
with
I've,
me?
I've mentioned that. I've mentioned that in some of the essays I've written. I talk about how it crossed socioeconomic lines. I mean, you look at that, like, I mean, like well into the movement, like in the mid '70s, the RTW guys, who I was friends with a bunch of them,
Yes.
came from a different, like they were Upper West Side, mostly white guys who
Zephyr. Yes.
like, yeah, Zeph came from the Upper East Side. I saw him. Um, and him and Danny Revolt were both from
Yes.
the Upper East Side, but they were all Central Park,
Yeah. Hanging at the band shell.
yeah, man, shell kids. Different lifestyle from somebody who grew up in a housing project. Me one, Pax. Bus. He was the king of the buses in like 74, 75.
Yes.
Um, I befriended. He ended up going to art and design. I befriended Michael. Michael was his name. I befriended him, and the first time I ever walked into a doorman building was going. We were going to stop by his place on 86th Street, and I was like blown the fuck away because he lived in a Classic Six, which is like the largest apartment I've ever been in my life, and I'm like 15 or 16 years old. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Um, that's social that crossing socioeconomic lines and mixing a culture that now has mixed different people of different classes. Scale 161, Eric Schweitzer, that was his roommate in high school, probably my first apartment. German kid from Germantown, Upper East Side.
Yes.
I went to a party with him at like Brearley or one of those private schools, because his band was playing. But because he was my room. But we met because of graffiti. So it's like, when would I ever have gone to these places like this private school on the Upper East Side, to it's like a hoity-toity kind of party, right?
Sure.
And I'm a teenager, so that I mean, and these are like real, examples of actual, that kind of crossover,
Yes.
I mean, in terms of like, being in a situation where you would have probably never have ended up there unless it was, because of some graffiti related thing. Um,
Yes.
but I
And
mean, there was like a lot of I mean, obviously there was a lot of, kids that were hanging out on like on any given day a writer's bench or something that were, you know
right.
so it was, yeah, it was definitely a huge mix of, yeah, everything in between. You had
Yes.
You
And
know?
and another thing with New York City, which when we pay attention to this narrative of cornbread sending graffiti around the world, where's our story in this? Because in Philadelphia, okay, so there was a guy, Bobby Beck, who influenced a lot of them, but the teenagers watched Bobby Beck on the walls in Philadelphia for many years before they actually picked up and got in the game. Now, Bobby Beck was a Caucasian dude, but when we look at the teenagers in Philadelphia, the whole first wave and for the first several years, it's all young black teenagers.
Right.
But in New York City, it's the exact opposite. It's starting
Well,
with, not with young black teenagers. It's starting with young white kids and young Puerto Rican kids. And then, we start to see a huge influx after 1970, where there was a time period where the majority would have been young black teenagers, but that's not where it begins.
no, look at the like what we call in our show the City of Kings. Once again, we referred to and at the very beginning of the evolution of graffiti culture in New York, we call it the Hellenic Posse. These guys that were at some Greek center together, people like Taki 183, Phil T. Greek, and that crew.
Yes,
SJK, Mike 171. These guys are Irish and
yes, yes,
Greeks because Washington Heights is filled with Greeks and,
yes.
and Irish and everything else, and Cubans and Puerto Ricans. But yeah, the early, I mean,
Julio was
Greek. Julio,
Julio was Colombian, I
they say
believe.
he was Colombian. Yeah.
Right. We can't be sure. But it again, what we're seeing is an exact opposite of what was going on in Philadelphia. And when we now go through the research, we're beginning here first. We have our own story, and it seems that people don't realize that it always starts on the walls. So when you were telling me about Taki and the lampposts, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't start on the trains. And when guys like Henry Chalfant will credit Taki, what outsiders have to understand is Taki will always tell you it did not start with me, and it probably did not even start with Julio. And it's always starting on the walls first. New York does not start on the trains. There's a
Taki is
history.
yeah, Taki is one of the most humble and pragmatic people that you might talk to about graffiti. He doesn't
Yes.
he doesn't consider he's like a gifted auto mechanic and very
Yes.
proud of that. He has a shop in Yonkers, White Plains. Uh,
Yes.
he he never could he doesn't consider himself an artist, and he doesn't he does never takes credit for the being the first graffiti.
Yes. And he will not. And you know what's amazing? So I have footage. Do you remember a writer, Uncle Rich?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
There
so
was
check this
Uncle
out.
Rich, and then there was another uncle. There was
Check this
Uncle
out. Yeah,
John,
yeah.
too.
Yeah. Check
The
this out
Queens
now.
guy, right?
Well, Uncle Rich is from the Bronx, and he hung out with DJ Kool Herc, right? He hung out with Phase Two, Stay High, Sweet Duke, Super Cool 223. When Kool Herc is interviewed, he always says Taki was like a graffiti god to us, and we all wanted to be like Taki. So when we see where the influence is coming from, Herc is not concerned with the fact that Taki is a Greek kid. Herc is concerned with what Taki was doing on the walls. And part
Yeah,
of and
what he had accomplished, right?
right. And that adds to a DJ Kool Herc who moves here from Jamaica in 1967. The very first thing in the streets he gets involved with is the wall writing. And therefore, getting up and seeing your name around, that swagger that he begins to develop as he gets Americanized, it's coming from Taki, and he says it.
You were writing graffiti?
Yes, I was a great big follower of Tacky 183.
Oh yeah, he was one of the first famous
Yes,
names on the
yes.
wall.
We looked up to him like the god of graffiti.
Uh-huh.
And we thought to do that, me and a friend of mine called Uncle Rich, line in 163, super cool, phase two. And we was tagging names, Clyde as cool.
So what was your tag? Clyde is cool?
Clyde as cool.
So what were you doing sound-wise? Were you like playing reggae and playing out when you first got to America?
When I started that, I was in the graffiti scene, like around 69, 70, and we was hitting trains and stuff,
Yeah.
Tacky was like our god,
Yeah.
So Tacky 183, but I was running with Stay High, Super Cool, Phase 2, Uncle Rich, and myself, Cool Herc.
Tell us about like New York City back then in terms of like the gangs and like the situation like in the street and the crews and the whole nine.
I wasn't with the gang.
Right.
I wasn't with it, didn't knock it. I know people that was in it, or they asked me to be division leader. And my father, we was with that.
Right.
You know what I mean? So he always compliment me and my friends. I would choose each other.
Okay. Like just without going through the initiation and the whole nine.
Right. And not because you got to be around it for that, or
Right.
you think less of me and all that type of stuff,
But who was the ex-Vandals?
We wasn't graffiti writers.
Okay, so the Vandals were not a gang.
Nah, wasn't
Okay.
that.
How'd you get into graffiti?
They used to call me Clyde.
Right.
My name is not Clyde, it was Clive.
Clive, like Clive Davis.
And they couldn't pronounce it. So at the time, who was big in the basketball court? Clyde Walsh Fraser.
Yes.
So I said, my name is Clyde.
Clyde.
So I started to write Clyde is cool. I like my music. I was hanging out with my ex-Vandal people, Phase 2, Sweet Duke, Clyde, Super Cool. All them guys, and we should like music. We used to dance. We like to dance. After we start bombing places, little trains and some stuff like that, we go hang out at the Puzzle or somewhere downtown, Nemo's and El Guanes and places like that,
In two of the clips, we hear DJ Kool Herc say that his tag name was Clyde as Cool. The structure of his tag name came right from El Barrio in East Harlem. In 1970, when he starts to write graffiti, we can trace that tag style through documented photographs that date all the way back to 1963. This represents heritage.
And I'd love to be able to bring Herc to Taki's garage. And yes, in Yonkers, I visited Taki in the summer of 2020. No, actually, it was the autumn of 2023. I bought him some stuff and asked him if we would sign it so that we can get it into some of the museums. And I mentioned Herc to him. And Taki was not aware of any of this. But once again, the most humble guy in the world, does not want to take credit. I'm going to try to get Taki to meet DJ Kool Herc, because these are humongous figures in subcultures coming out of New York City. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's something that needs to have the story told properly. So I want to parlay the rest of this, because we didn't get a chance to speak about art and design, and that's fine, because I told you and I start talking and this is the stuff that happens. That's okay, because we just got out some real great stuff. We talked about the Manhattan movie credit. What I'd like to say, though, is when we transition, I mentioned to you The Radiant Child, the article in Art Forum from 1981, December, about Jean. And they did that article about him, and it's amazing. And I know you told me Rene Ricard, I believe, was the gentleman, and he was not part of the wall writers culture. He had no idea.
No, very far from it.
Right. And he was an outsider, basically. But the one thing he did know is that he saw Taki in the earlier days. And when he talks about Jean and he starts this piece, The Radiant Child, he writes, the very first line is, "Where have the tags gone?" Somewhere along that line. And in parentheses, he writes, "Where's Taki?" And it's just the proof in the pudding that this guy is so legendary, it's kind of hard to get around his name whenever you're going to speak about these things, because of how big his legend was in New York City,
Yeah.
And he Renee visits that theme again and again throughout the piece. It will pop up in parentheses again. Where's Taki? It's like he's searching for Taki. And I know when I bought the Rolling Stone issue to Taki and asked him to put a signature on it so that we can have it framed and put into a museum, He didn't remember the Rolling Stone article. I'm 100% sure he has no idea that he's spoken about in Art Forum either. So I'm going to take a trip up again to Taki's garage that you mentioned. And I got him that Rolling Stone article because he was so nice to sign it for me. I felt bad. And I went out on the internet again and I tracked one down and I was able to bring it back to him and give that to him. And I also gave him an old Zorro comic from 1959 with the guy from the Disney, show. And I gave him a copy of that Herbert Cole study. Now, check this out. This is what's interesting. So when I go back to visit him again, he said to me, he saw the Rolling Stone, he saw the El Marco. His eyes, excuse me, not El Marco, the Zorro comic.
Zorro.
Yes, his eyes went right to the Herbert Cole study, and he pointed at it and said, I read that. Yes, Taki, I bought that to you. And he went, yeah, that's right. And I said, so now do you see where Julio's getting it from? And this is what Taki said. And the reason, and this is the thing, Al, when I went to give Taki that article, I'm forming a relationship with him. I'm not this guy that constantly pulls the camera out. I'm not, you know what I mean? I'm a human being, and so is Taki. I didn't do an interview that day because I'm getting to know Taki and he's sharing great information with me. And I just wanted to bring that. But what he said was, that's what it is. You go visit your aunt or you go visit a girlfriend in another neighborhood. You see what they're doing, and then you bring it back to your neighborhood. And he totally agreed.
Of course.
Julio saw this somewhere else. And Taki always said, not only am I not first, I don't even think it begins with Julio.
I know. I remember that.
So
it has to be that. That's how it spread.
Exactly.
That's how it spread. I mean, that's how I started. There was no tags in the Lower East Side when I started.
Right.
But going to Washington Heights, I was like, it was a regular thing. We used to go up there every weekend, damn near. And naturally, I mean, well, not naturally, but the fact was that I was attracted to that. And of course, I mean, it had to be, you had to see it. And it's not like I invented it in my head, right? I had to see it somewhere. So, and I imagine that I'm not one isolated case of that happening. That happened throughout the city with many, many different people who went to different areas, saw something, and like, oh, wow. And within a couple of years, it happened quickly. Because within a couple of years, the whole city was writing,
Yep.
It's I mean, it's amazing how it was like wildfire,
So what it is everybody's constantly looking for this one guy who, that's not the case in New York. And since it was held back because of gang boundaries, and New York is a very difficult island at times and also, let's just think about how many corners and walls are just in Harlem alone. You know what I mean? It's unbelievable. So where these neighborhoods were bombed out, we're talking about Manhattan Valley, Upper West Side. We're talking about the South Side of Morningside Heights. We're talking about El Barrio. We're talking about Italian Harlem. So there's a big patch that has these tags, and now kids are commuting through these areas and seeing it, where it was kids bringing it to their neighborhood from seeing other neighborhoods bombed out, as opposed to this one guy that went in and brought it to everyone. That's literally
right. This Pied Piper
it's ridiculous.
It's absurd. I mean, New York is especially. I mean, considering the fact that back then there was the only way of spreading stuff was that was like, I mean, the train itself was our internet.
Yes.
It's like it goes from one end to the other.
Yeah.
And whatever's happening, you see a name on a train and you're going to say, wow, what's that? And if you're in Far Rockaway and the train goes, think about it. I mean, Far Rockaway is quite a distance from Washington Heights, and the A train goes through in East New York, through Bed-Stuy, through all those neighborhoods,
Yes. And even though sometimes it's going on already, I'll give you an example. Tracy 168, when I first met him, I always loved how he said, I put this tag up on the train one day, and then I'm still hanging out up on the train hours later, and here the name comes back again. And I
Yeah.
realized, so when I met Tracy, I said it to him just to want to hear the legend, right? And the smile just came on his face, and he grabbed my shoulder, and he was like, "You get it, right?" It's a I didn't realize, we thought there was an infinite amount of trains and an infinite amount of track, and there wasn't. There wasn't. It went from the Bronx through Manhattan all the way
Came
down
back.
and came back, and he's still up smoking joints, fooling around on the top of the platform, and the name comes back, and he goes, "Holy shit," you know. And it's just definitely amazing when you think about these early, these things are key in starting that movement. So I'm very glad that we got a chance to come on again. We're gonna wrap this one up now, and maybe in the future we'll get a chance to talk about art and design. I do see that.
I'll tell you one quick
Yeah.
Tracy / art and design story.
Okay.
It's the original movie, the original version of Taking of the Pelham 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
So everybody was excited to go see the movie because they thought that they were gonna see their name on the number 6 train, right?
Uh-huh.
And Tracy went and it told us that the train, they used clean cars in the film. They were not trying to promote graffiti, so they
Okay.
used clearly. He says, he says, you, to me, Bomb One. He says, you got a tag in a scene where the truck stops the cop car. There's the side of the truck got a Bomb One Snake 3 tag.
Oh, we're gonna have to look that
Yeah,
up. We're
that
gonna.
was
I'll look that up, and I'll look that. I'll get
It's
that
a
on
scene
the.
where they're going to deliver the money, and the cop, and basically a high speed a car going trying to
Yes.
trying to get to a place that before the time's up or whatever, and a truck a box truck stops in
Yes.
front of the cop car and is like honking, man. And you see that my tag, Bomb One Snake 3.
I've read that book, so I'm looking for an excuse to watch the movie, and you just gave me
The
my
original
excuse.
movie with
Yes,
Walter
yes,
Matthau.
yes, definitely.
It's
So, so once
anyway,
again,
that was cool because Tracy went and saw the movie before anybody,
that is great.
thinking that he was, and everybody was so disappointed when they used clean trains,
Yeah. So again, thank you so much, Al. We're gonna cut this one now. So, folks, we were speaking with Bomb One. This is the man that brought Jean around to a lot of the stuff that influenced him, not only with SAMO, but with his artwork. And thank you so much, Al. It's going to come to an end now. So you and I will stay in touch, sir. And I
Yeah,
look
we
forward.
will. I'll be talking to you, man.
Yes, definitely, my brother. Thank you so much.
All right, you have a good one.
Take care.